3 months. Just 3 months, and my wife turned into a stranger. She made excuses about being tired, avoided intimacy, and said that love only needed understanding, not physical touch. I believed her, until the day I found a bottle of lubricant under the bed, something I knew for certain wasn't meant for me. I stayed silent. No yelling, no confrontation. I simply replaced the contents with clear industrial glue. That evening, when she said she'd be home late because the shop was busy, I just smiled, started the car, and followed her. And then, what happened next was a storm of chaos. Screams, flashing lights, and the wail of an ambulance piercing the night. My parents were there to witness it, their faces pale, their eyes filled with horror. And me, I just stood there, silent, watching everything crumble. Hello, my name is Colton Ward. I'm 29 years old, living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a small city with streets shaded by oak trees and quiet afternoons. I work as a manager at Home Depot, where shelves stocked with building materials, paint, and tools have become part of my life. The job isn't glamorous, but it's stable, and I enjoy the feeling of helping customers pick out the right screws or plumbing fittings. It gives me a sense of control, something I've slowly realized I'm losing in my own home. I've been married to Daisy for 3 years. Daisy, my wife, is 27, a woman as radiant as summer sunshine. She runs a small nail salon in the nearby shopping center, where the smell of nail polish and the laughter of customers blend into a familiar melody. When we first got married, everything was perfect. We used to spend evenings on the couch, eating popcorn, watching cheesy romantic movies that Daisy loved. She'd rest her head on my shoulder, whispering about her dreams of expanding the salon or one day having a child with my eyes. I believed we'd always be like that, the perfect couple in our little home. But over the past few months, things have changed. Daisy is no longer the cheerful woman who'd hold my hand out of the blue. She's become distant, as if an invisible wall has gone up between us. Every time I tried to hold her, she'd subtly pull away, saying she was exhausted from work. At first, I believed her. I told myself the nail salon was in its busy season, that Daisy was juggling clients and a pile of bills. I tried to be a good husband, cooking dinner when she came home late, quietly doing the laundry so she could rest. But deep down, I started to feel something was off, like a cold breeze slipping through a cracked door. Daisy started developing strange habits. She used to be simple, favoring t-shirts and jeans, but now I'd see her wearing tight, alluring dresses, far more glamorous than before. Every morning before leaving the house, she'd stand in front of the mirror, spritzing on perfume, an expensive kind I'd never seen her use before. Then there were the late nights. Some evenings I'd sit in the living room, the clock ticking past 10, then 11, and Daisy still wouldn't be home. When I called, her responses were curt. "The shop's super busy, babe. I have to stay late to clean up." Her voice was soft, but there was something forced about it, like she was acting. I tried not to overthink it, tried to believe she was just swamped with work. But then I caught her sitting on the couch, texting on her phone, her lips curling into a smile I hadn't seen in ages. When I asked, "Who's texting you that's got you so happy?" she flinched, locked her screen, and brushed it off with a laugh. "Oh, just a friend from the shop. Nothing important." I didn't want to doubt Daisy. I loved her with all my heart, had vowed before God to protect and trust her for life. But those little details, her evasive glances, the late nights, the secretive smile while texting, they piled up in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to see completed. At night, lying next to her, I'd hear her steady breathing, but it felt like we were in two different worlds. I wondered, was I imagining things? Or was something really happening right in front of me that I didn't want to face? One Saturday morning, I woke up early as usual. Daisy was still asleep, her hair spread across the pillow, her face as beautiful as the day we met. I quietly brewed coffee, standing by the window where sunlight filtered through the oak trees. Our house was small but cozy, with our wedding photo on the wall and the potted plants Daisy tended to. From the outside, we still looked like a happy couple. But I knew deep down, a crack had started to form. I tried to push away the dark thoughts. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe Daisy was just trying to look good to keep up appearances for the salon. But as I sat on the couch, turning on the TV to pass the time, I couldn't stop thinking about the times she avoided my gaze, the messages she quickly deleted when I got close. I told myself, Colton, you have to trust her. You're her husband. If you don't trust her, who will? But deep inside, a small, icy voice kept whispering, she's hiding something from you. I started paying closer attention. Whenever Daisy went out, she always took her purse, even if she was just running errands or meeting friends. One time, I caught her standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress, then looking at her phone with a radiant smile. When I asked, "Where are you going looking so nice?" she smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, just meeting some friends. It's been a while since we hung out." I nodded, but inside the seed of doubt had taken root, spreading like wildfire. In the days that followed, I tried to keep myself busy at Home Depot. I rearranged shelves, checked inventory, and talked to customers about the best paint for wooden fences or how to choose the right drill. Work helped me temporarily forget the thoughts gnawing at my mind. But every time I returned to our little house, the feeling of unease would resurface. Daisy still smiled, still talked, but I could sense the growing distance between us. She was like a locked book, and I no longer held the key to open it. One Tuesday morning, I had a rare day off from my packed schedule. Daisy woke up early as usual, getting ready to head to the nail salon. I lay in bed pretending to be half asleep, but my eyes followed her through the slits of my eyelids. She wore a tight, dark green dress that accentuated the curves I used to adore. She stood in front of the mirror, spritzing perfume, then checked her phone with a focused expression. "I'm heading out, babe," she called out, her voice soft but hurried. "All right, have a great day," I replied, keeping my tone calm. The door closed, and the sound of her car's engine faded into the distance. I lay there for a few more minutes, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a heavy stone was pressing down on my chest. I decided to do something to pass the time. The house hadn't been thoroughly cleaned in a while, and I thought a day off was a good opportunity to tidy things up. I turned on the vacuum, wiped the dust off the bookshelves, and organized the pile of old magazines in the living room. The tasks made me feel like I had some control over my life, even if it was just the small things. As the midday sunlight poured through the window, I decided to change the bed sheets, something Daisy usually did, but today I wanted to do it myself to surprise her. I pulled the bed away from the wall to clean the dust underneath. The bed was heavy, but I was used to lifting things at Home Depot, so it wasn't much trouble. As I bent down to wipe the wooden floor, something small rolled out from under the bed, clattering across the floor. I paused, frowning, thinking it might be a coin or one of Daisy's earrings. But when I bent down to pick it up, my heart seemed to stop. It was a small, clear plastic bottle of lubricant about half full. The label was slightly faded, but I recognized it, the kind Daisy and I had bought together during a supermarket trip, laughing awkwardly at the checkout counter. I picked up the bottle, my hand trembling slightly. My mind reeled. Daisy and I hadn't been intimate in over 3 months. 3 long months filled with her excuses of being tired or having a headache. So what was this bottle doing here under our bed? I stood frozen, the bottle resting in my palm, cold as an accusation. I wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. Maybe Daisy had used it on her own. Maybe it had fallen under the bed long ago and we hadn't noticed. But those questions dissolved quickly like soap bubbles bursting in the light. This bottle couldn't have accidentally ended up here. Not after 3 months without a single moment of closeness between us. I felt as if someone had slapped me across the face hard enough to leave me dizzy. My breathing grew heavy, and for a moment I wanted to smash something. The bed, the wall, or this damn bottle. But I didn't. I stood there silently, letting the storm inside me rage. I looked down at the bottle, then carefully placed it back under the bed as if it had never been found. I pulled the blanket down, covering the secret I'd just uncovered. I didn't want Daisy to know I'd seen it. Not yet. I continued cleaning, but everything now felt like it was happening through a fog. I vacuumed, wiped the floors, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about Daisy, her smile when she texted, the time she came home late with messy hair and evasive eyes. That bottle was like the final piece of a puzzle, forming a picture I'd been trying not to see. But now I couldn't avoid it anymore. Something was happening, and deep down, I knew the truth would hurt more than anything I'd ever imagined. That evening, Daisy came home late, as I'd expected. I sat on the couch, the TV on, but nothing registering in my mind. When the door opened, she walked in, carrying the familiar scent of her perfume and a tired smile. "Busy day at the shop?" I asked, my voice flat, my eyes still fixed on the TV screen. "Yeah, absolutely crazy," she replied, slipping off her shoes and heading straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. I nodded, but my gaze had changed. I no longer looked at her as the wife I once loved unconditionally. Now I saw her as a stranger, someone hiding a secret I no longer wanted to guess at. I didn't mention the bottle. I didn't ask where she'd been, what she'd done, or who she'd been with. I just sat there, letting the silence between us grow heavier than ever. When Daisy went to shower, I heard the sound of running water, her humming a tune as if everything was normal. But for me, nothing was normal anymore. That night I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The bottle under the bed seemed to whisper to me, reminding me of a truth I wasn't ready to face. Inside me, a small crack had formed. Not anger, but a quiet, sharp pain. I knew that crack would keep spreading, consuming every ounce of trust I'd once had in Daisy, in our marriage. Since the day I found the bottle of lubricant, I became a different person. I still went to work, still laughed and chatted with colleagues at Home Depot, still helped customers choose screws or plumbing fittings. But in my mind, a part of me was constantly observing, memorizing, and analyzing every move Daisy made. I didn't want to become a paranoid, controlling husband, monitoring his wife's every second. But that bottle, like a knife slicing into my heart, made it impossible for me to keep pretending everything was fine. I started noticing small details I'd previously overlooked. Daisy now kept her phone on silent whenever she was home. She placed it face down on the table or carried it with her even into the bathroom, as if afraid I'd see a message. One time I heard a faint vibration from her purse, but when I asked, "Who's texting you, babe?" she just smiled and shook her head. "Probably just a client booking an appointment," she said, quickly changing the subject to talk about a difficult customer at the nail salon. But I no longer believed her words so easily. In the evenings, Daisy often went out with vague excuses. "I need to pick up supplies for the shop," she'd say, then hurriedly grab her jacket and disappear through the door. I watched her go, feeling like my heart was being squeezed. Picking up supplies at 8 in the evening. Where? With whom? I wanted to ask, to shout, but I held back. I didn't want to confront her, didn't want to shatter the fragile shell of our marriage. Instead, I chose to observe silently, like a hunter waiting for the prey to reveal itself. One Friday evening, Daisy walked into the living room dressed neatly in a dress, her hair cascading loosely. "I need to swing by a friend's to return something," she said, her voice soft but slightly rushed. She stood in front of the mirror, checking her lipstick, then turned to look at me. "It won't take long, babe." I nodded, smiling as if nothing was amiss. "All right, drive safe," I replied. But in my mind, a decision had formed. Tonight I wouldn't sit and wait anymore. I would find the truth. When the door closed and the sound of Daisy's car faded into the distance, I stood up and grabbed my keys. My heart was pounding, not out of fear, but from an overwhelming urge. I needed to know. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I drove my pickup truck, keeping a safe distance, following Daisy's white car. The streets of Baton Rouge were quiet at night, with only the dim yellow glow of streetlights illuminating the rows of oak trees. I kept my speed slow, my eyes fixed on her taillights. Every time she turned, I followed, careful not to be noticed. Daisy drove out of the city center, heading toward the suburbs. I frowned, wondering where she was going. Returning something to a friend? In a place this far out? Her car finally stopped in front of a small, rundown rental house at the end of a quiet street. It was an old house, with yellow light spilling from an upstairs window. I turned off my engine and parked in a dark corner, hidden by shadows. I sat there in silence, my breathing heavy, my eyes glued to the house. A few minutes later, the front door opened. A man stepped out, tall with broad shoulders. Under the streetlight, I saw his face clearly. My heart seemed to stop. It was Mason, my younger brother. His silver pickup truck was parked nearby, glinting under the light like a cruel confirmation. I held my breath, feeling the blood in my veins turn to ice. Daisy got out of her car, her hair shimmering in the light. Mason placed his hand lightly on her back, guiding her inside. The door closed and the upstairs light grew brighter. I sat motionless in my truck, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to fling open the car door, storm into that house, smash everything and scream at both of them. But I didn't. I just sat there, letting the truth slowly seep into every fiber of my being. Daisy, the wife I loved, and Mason, my own brother, the one I'd protected and looked out for throughout our childhood, were together in that house behind that door. All my suspicions, all the scattered pieces in my mind now came together into a clear, heart-wrenching picture. I don't know how long I sat in the truck. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe half an hour. All I know is that when the door opened again, Daisy stepped out, her hair disheveled, her jacket hastily buttoned. Mason stood at the door, seeing her off with the same charming smile I'd seen him use to win over anyone. Daisy got into her car and drove away, completely unaware that I was there in the darkness witnessing it all. I drove home slowly like a machine. The streets blurred before my eyes, not from rain or fog, but from the cold, empty feeling flooding my chest. I didn't get angry, didn't cry. I just felt like I'd lost a part of myself, the part that trusted, that loved, that hoped for a happy family. And I knew from that moment on everything had changed forever. The rain began to fall as I drove through the familiar streets of Baton Rouge. The steady patter of raindrops on the windshield, like a mournful rhythm, pulled me back to the days of my childhood in the small house on the outskirts of town. That house, with its weathered wooden porch and a little garden overrun with weeds, was where I grew up, where I learned to be the eldest son, the model son in my parents' eyes. But now, looking back, all I could see was a series of sacrifices that had never been repaid. My father, Tom Ward, 58 years old, was a stern man with a weathered face and eyes that always seemed to be judging. He worked at a steel factory, and every evening he came home carrying the scent of metal mixed with sweat. To him, I was always the eldest, the one who had to set an example, to sacrifice, to endure. "You're the older brother, Colton," he'd often say, his voice low but sharp. "You have to be strong to look out for your little brother. Don't let him go astray." I heard those words from a young age before I fully understood their weight. But I tried. I always tried. My mother, Helen Ward, 55 years old, was different. She was gentle, with a warm smile and hands always ready to embrace me when I fell. But I soon realized that her gentleness wasn't for me, at least not as much as it was for Mason. She loved Mason openly, almost blindly. Mason, my younger brother, was the baby of the family, the golden child. He was born with golden hair, sparkling blue eyes, and a smile that could charm anyone. Mom called him her little boy, and no matter what he did wrong, from getting into fights at school to stealing money from her purse, she always found an excuse. "He's still young," she'd say, even when Mason was 15 or 16. "He needs time to grow up." I grew up under my father's reminders and my mother's favoritism. At 15, I started working part-time, delivering newspapers every morning before school to afford books and supplies. Meanwhile, Mason got a shiny new bicycle from our parents, complete with a bell that he loved showing off around the neighborhood. I wasn't jealous, not really. I just thought that's how things worked. I was the eldest. I had to sacrifice. But every time I saw Mason riding his bike around the yard laughing carefree, I felt a pang in my chest as if I was being left behind. When I earned a college scholarship, a milestone I'd sweated and cried for, my father only nodded and said, "Good. But don't forget to look after your brother." There was no celebration, No proud pat on the shoulder. Meanwhile, when Mason graduated high school with mediocre grades, Mom threw a big party inviting all our relatives and bought him a new phone. I stood in the corner of the room holding a soda, watching Mason surrounded by everyone, and wondered, would it ever be my turn to be loved like that? My entire youth was shaped by one repeated phrase from my parents. Being the older brother means sacrificing. I listened, I believed, and I lived by it. I set aside my own dreams to look after Mason, to make sure he didn't go astray. I worked hard, lived upright, because I thought that's how I'd make my parents proud. Mason was different. He was reckless, charming, with a silver tongue that could make anyone trust him. His mistakes were always forgiven. When he dropped out of college after a year, Mom only sighed and said, "He needs time to find his path." When he crashed the first car our parents bought him, Dad just shook his head and handed over money for repairs. And me? I was never allowed to make mistakes. I was never allowed to be weak. Now, knowing my wife was cheating with my own brother, I gave a bitter smile. My whole life I'd tried to do the right thing, to be a good brother, a good husband. But that very effort had thrown me into a spiral of betrayal. Daisy, the woman I'd vowed to protect for life, and Mason, the brother I'd sheltered through our childhood, were now together, destroying everything I'd built. I glanced in the rearview mirror, the streetlights reflecting my face, calm but my eyes devoid of warmth. They were cold, like the night sky outside. The rain kept falling, each drop tapping on the windshield, as if reminding me of the years I'd lived for others. I thought of my father, my mother, how they always put Mason above me, as if I wasn't worthy of their love. I thought of Daisy, of the nights I lay beside her, trying to believe she was still the woman I once loved. But now all I could see was a chain of lies and favoritism that had stretched across my life. When I pulled up to the house, Daisy still wasn't home. I walked into the living room, sat on the couch, the dim light surrounding me. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't play music. I just sat there in silence, letting the truth sink into every cell of my body. In that moment, I understood that what needed to end wasn't just my marriage to Daisy. It was also the cycle of silence, sacrifice, and favoritism I'd endured my whole life. I no longer wanted to be the older brother who gave everything up. I no longer wanted to live in Mason's shadow or in Daisy's lies. I wanted to take back my life, even if it meant facing the greatest pain of all. After the night I discovered Daisy and Mason, I returned to Home Depot as if nothing had happened. I still arrived early, checked the inventory lists, showed new employees how to arrange the shelves, and chatted with customers about the most durable paint for porch roofs. But inside, I was a different person. Every smile, every word was a mask I wore to hide the storm raging within me. I was no longer Colton Ward, the trusting husband, the sacrificing older brother. I was a man calculating, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. 8 years as a manager at Home Depot had taught me more than just how to sell screws or advise on plumbing. I knew every chemical, every solution, every industrial adhesive on the shelves. I knew which glue was clear, odorless, could bond human skin in seconds, and could only be separated with a special solvent not everyone had access to. That kind of glue, if misused, could become a disaster. Not lethal, but enough to make the wrongdoer pay a steep price. The thought flashed through my mind like lightning, and I knew it would be my way of responding. That afternoon, I stood in aisle 12, where the industrial adhesives were displayed. I picked up a tube of construction glue, the kind used for bonding ceramic tiles or metal. The label clearly stated, "Extremely strong bond, dries in 5 seconds, requires specialized solvent to separate." I read it carefully, my fingers tracing the text, a cold sensation spreading through me. I placed the tube in my cart and paid at the checkout as if it were just another ordinary item. No one at Home Depot, not my colleagues, not the customers, knew I had just purchased a weapon, not to cause pain, but to teach Daisy and Mason a lesson they would never forget. Back home, I hid the tube of glue in the garage, tucking it behind a pile of repair tools where Daisy would never look. In the days that followed, I kept everything as it was. I still made breakfast, still asked Daisy about her work, still nodded when she talked about her busy days at the nail salon. But every time she lied, "I have to pick up supplies tonight or the appointment book is packed." I just smiled, my eyes cold. Daisy didn't know that every lie, every text she hurriedly deleted when I came near, was adding fuel to my plan for retribution. She thought I was still the gentle Colton, the husband who trusted easily. She was wrong. One morning, Daisy woke up earlier than usual, getting ready for work. I heard the sound of running water in the bathroom, her humming a familiar tune. I sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee, but my mind was elsewhere. When Daisy emerged, her hair wet, a towel wrapped around her, she smiled at me. "I'm swamped all day today, probably getting home late," she said. I nodded, my voice even. "All right, be careful," I replied. As the door closed and Daisy's car drove away, I stood up and walked into the bedroom. Everything in the room was the same: the bed with its white sheets, the wedding photo hanging on the wall, and the nightstand drawer where I'd once found the bottle of lubricant. I pulled the drawer open, my heart pounding but my hands steady. The bottle was still there, just as I remembered, now nearly empty. I picked it up, my fingers brushing over the familiar label. I opened the cap and sniffed. There was no scent left, just a faint plastic tang. I carried the bottle to the kitchen sink, poured the remaining contents down the drain, and watched the slick liquid disappear without hesitation. I retrieved the tube of industrial glue from the garage and carefully pumped it into the bottle, filling it about halfway. The glue was thick, clear, odorless, and looked no different from the real lubricant. I worked slowly, precisely, like a craftsman perfecting a piece of work. I wiped the cap clean, screwed it back on tightly, and placed the bottle back in the drawer exactly where it had been, as if no one had touched it. I checked one last time. Everything was perfect, not a single trace. No one, not even Daisy, would suspect that the bottle now contained something entirely different. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the closed drawer, and let out a soft breath. My eyes were cold, but there was no regret in my heart. "I won't hit, won't yell, won't cry," I whispered to myself, my voice so low it was almost inaudible. "But they'll remember this night forever." I returned to the living room, sat on the couch, and turned on the TV. The sound of a talk show filled the air, but I wasn't listening. I thought of Daisy, of Mason, of the rental house in the suburbs with its dim yellow light. I thought of Daisy's lies, of the way Mason placed his hand on her back, of the years I spent sacrificing only to be repaid with betrayal. My plan wasn't blind revenge. It was a message, a way for them to face the consequences of what they'd done. The day passed slowly. I did chores, checked work emails, even mowed the lawn. I kept everything normal, as if I were still the Colton of yesterday. But inside, I had changed. I was no longer the blindly trusting husband, no longer the resigned older brother. I was a man ready to take back what was mine, not with violence, but with silence and calculation. Saturday evening arrived, and the air in Baton Rouge carried the chill of autumn. I sat in the living room, the dim light casting shadows on the wall where the wedding photo of Daisy and me still hung. A bitter reminder. My phone buzzed with a text from Daisy. "The shop's packed, I'll probably be home late. Don't wait up." I read the message, my lips curling into a cold smile. "The shop's packed," I muttered under my breath, so low only I could hear. I knew she was at the rental house in the suburbs, where the dim yellow light glowed from the upstairs window, where Mason's silver pickup truck was parked in the yard. I stood up, grabbed my car keys, and left the house. No hesitation, no rush. I drove through the familiar streets, the streetlights passing by like hazy streaks of light. I didn't play music, didn't let my thoughts wander. In my mind, there was only one image: the bottle of lubricant in the drawer, now filled with industrial glue, waiting for its moment. I knew tonight everything would be laid bare. The suburban street came into view, quiet and dark, with only the light from the rental house at the end of the road. Mason's silver pickup was parked out front, gleaming under the moonlight. Daisy's car was there too, neatly beside it, like a cruel confirmation. I parked in a shadowed corner, turned off the engine, and sat in the darkness. My heart beat steadily, neither fast nor slow. I was no longer the Colton of old. the one who would storm into that house yelling or breaking things. I was a man with a plan, and I was ready for it to unfold. I picked up my phone, my fingers scrolling through the contacts, stopping at my father's number, Tom Ward. I pressed call. "Dad, I need you and Mom to come to a place," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Where? What's going on?" His voice was gruff, as always. "I want you and Mom to see the son you've always doted on with your own eyes." I gave the address, short and to the point, then hung up. I knew they'd be skeptical, but they'd come. They always did for Mason. 20 minutes later, my parents' old car pulled up a few meters away. Tom stepped out, his tall frame slightly hunched, his eyes scanning the surroundings. My mother, Helen, followed, her scarf wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her face etched with worry. I stepped out of my car and greeted them with a nod. "Why did you drag us out here, Colton?" Dad asked, his tone tinged with irritation. "Just wait a bit, you'll see," I replied, my eyes fixed on the lit-up house. The three of us stood there in the darkness, silently staring at the house. No one spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying a biting chill. I felt my mother's gaze, as if she was trying to guess what I was thinking, but I didn't look back. I just waited, like a patient hunter. Then from inside the house, a scream rang out. Daisy's scream, panicked and laced with pain. It was followed by Mason's voice, urgent, almost pleading. I stood still, my heart pounding but my lips curling slightly. My plan had begun. A second, louder scream made the neighbors peek out of their doors. Lights from nearby houses flicked on, and a few people stepped into their yards, whispering to each other. "What's happening?" my mother whispered, her voice trembling. My father gripped her hand, but his eyes remained fixed on the house. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was revealing itself. The sound of an ambulance siren echoed in the distance, growing closer. The crowd of neighbors grew, their murmurs filling the air. The front door of the house burst open and 2 paramedics rushed inside with a stretcher. Minutes later they emerged, and I saw Daisy and Mason, stuck together, their faces contorted with pain and fear. Daisy was sobbing, her hair a mess, while Mason struggled but couldn't pull free. The industrial glue had done its job. I stood there, motionless, watching them being loaded into the ambulance. The flashing lights illuminated my parents' faces. Tom stood frozen, his hands clenched so tightly they trembled. My mother, Helen, collapsed sobbing, one hand covering her mouth as if she couldn't believe what was happening. "Mason, no, it can't be," she mumbled, her voice breaking. I looked at her but said nothing. My heart was cold, not with anger but with an emptiness, as if all my emotions had been drained. The neighbors' whispers grew louder. "What's going on? Are they stuck together? Who would let this happen?" The questions buzzed around, but I didn't care. I just watched the ambulance drive away, carrying Daisy and Mason, the 2 people who had betrayed me in the cruelest way. My father turned to me, his eyes full of suspicion. "Colton, you knew about this, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. I just looked at him, silent. I didn't need to explain. The truth was clear enough. My mother was still crying, clinging to my father's arm for support. "Why Mason?" "Why?" she repeated, as if the question could change what had just happened. But I knew no answer would be enough to soothe her. No excuse could cover the fact that Mason, the son she cherished most, had destroyed this family. I turned away without another word. I got into my car, leaving my parents standing there in the cold wind and flashing lights. In my mind, the image of Daisy and Mason stuck together, their faces twisted in pain, replayed like a film. I didn't feel satisfaction, didn't feel triumph. I only felt a void where love, trust, and family once existed. A knock on the car window broke the silence. It was my mother, Helen, her voice trembling. "Colton, we need to go to the hospital." I didn't ask questions, only replied curtly, "All right. We'll go to the hospital to sort everything out." I started the car. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy, as if the entire city of Baton Rouge was holding its breath in the wake of the unfolding tragedy. I drove behind my parents, following the flashing lights of the ambulance to the central hospital. In the car, I didn't play music or let my thoughts wander. All I could see was the image of Daisy and Mason stuck together, their faces contorted in pain, being loaded into the ambulance amidst the murmuring crowd. I didn't know what I should feel, anger, satisfaction, or just a cold emptiness. But I knew I needed to face them, even if just once, to look directly at the truth. At the hospital, the atmosphere was chaotic. Nurses rushed back and forth, and the loudspeaker blared with constant calls for doctors. My father, Tom, stood in a corner of the hallway, arms tightly crossed, his weathered face now even more somber. My mother sat on a plastic chair, clutching a handkerchief, her eyes red from crying. "How did this happen, Colton?" she whispered when she saw me. I didn't answer, just leaned against the wall, my gaze fixed on the emergency room door. I didn't want to comfort her. Not now. The doctors and nurses worked for over an hour, trying to separate Daisy and Mason. I caught fragments of their conversation through the door. Industrial glue bonds tightly to skin. Requires a special solvent. Each word was like a knife, but I felt no regret. My plan had unfolded exactly as intended. Finally, a doctor emerged, wiping sweat from his forehead, and announced that they had successfully separated the two and moved them to separate rooms for monitoring. "They're stable but need rest," he said, his voice weary. "Family can visit." My father straightened up, but his eyes avoided mine. My mother stood, trembling, clutching my father's hand for support. I followed them, my steps slow, through the long hallway filled with the sharp smell of antiseptic. The hospital room was at the end of the corridor, the door slightly ajar. As we entered, I saw Mason on the left bed, his face pale. Daisy was on the right, her hair disheveled, her eyes swollen from crying. Both fell silent when they saw us, as if the air in the room had suddenly grown suffocating. Mason spoke first, his voice weak but defensive. "Colton, you have to listen to me. It's not what you think." He tried to sit up but winced in pain and lay back down. "This was just a misunderstanding. You have to believe me." I stood there, hands in my pockets, staring directly into Mason's eyes. My gaze was cold, unwavering. The bond between us, the one I had cherished for years, had turned to ashes. I said nothing, just looked, and my stare seemed to make Mason tremble. Daisy burst into tears, her voice choked. "Colton, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't want—" She covered her face with her hands, tears streaming through her fingers. "You have to believe me. I didn't want to hurt you." I looked at her, the woman I had loved more than anything, the one I had vowed to protect for life. But now, I saw only a stranger, someone who had destroyed everything we had built. I remained silent. Her lies, the excuses about the busy shop or meeting friends, were now just additional stabs to an already bleeding wound. My father suddenly shouted, his voice echoing in the small room. "Mason, what have you done? You're my son, and you dared to do this to your brother?" He stepped toward Mason's bed, his fists clenched as if he wanted to crush something. "How did I raise you? Did you think you could tear this family apart and not pay a price?" Mason lowered his head, unable to meet our father's eyes, but I saw his eyes were red, whether from pain or regret I couldn't tell. My mother, Helen, could only sob. "Why did you do this, Mason? Why did you make me suffer like this?" she cried, her voice breaking. She clutched her face as if trying to hide from the truth before her. I looked at my mother, the woman who had doted on Mason for years, always excusing his every mistake. There was no room left in my heart for pity. I felt only emptiness, as if all my emotions had been drained that night. The hospital room became a stage where every sin, lie, and hurt was laid bare. Daisy's sobs, Mason's pleas, my father's anger, and my mother's pain blended into a chaotic symphony. But I stood there, motionless, like an outsider. I didn't say a word, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I refused to waste my breath on them. The truth was clear, and no excuse could change what I had seen, what I now knew. Finally, I turned and walked out of the room. My father called after me. "Colton, where are you going?" I didn't answer. I walked down the hallway, past the cold white lights, out to the parking lot. I stood there, taking a deep breath, and looked up at the pitch-black sky. I knew that after tonight I had severed the last thread connecting me to Daisy, to Mason, and to the Ward family. But the story, which seemed to have ended, was far from over. As I placed my hand on the car door handle, hurried footsteps echoed from behind. I turned to see my mother, Helen, running toward me, her face streaked with tears. "Colton, you have to come back," she said, her voice breaking. "Something's happening. The police. They're here for Mason." I frowned, a strange feeling stirring within me. Not satisfaction, but a cold curiosity. I nodded and followed her back to the hospital corridor. When we entered the hospital room, the atmosphere was still heavy, like a block of lead. Daisy sat huddled on her bed, her eyes swollen and red, while Mason lay there, his face pale, his eyes frantic with panic. My father, Tom, stood in the corner of the room, his hands clenched tightly as if holding back a storm. But my attention was drawn to the door where two uniformed police officers had just entered. They stood tall, their expressions stern, one holding a stack of papers. "We need to confirm the identity of Mason Ward," the taller officer said, his voice steady but cold. Mason sat up abruptly, clearly still in pain from the glue incident. I'm Mason Ward," he replied, his voice trembling. The other officer pulled out a sheet of paper and read aloud, "Mason Ward, you are under investigation for organized fraud and misappropriation of property. We have a warrant for your arrest." The room seemed to freeze. My mother, Helen, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. My father, Tom, took a step forward, his voice low but seething with anger. "Fraud? What are you talking about? My son is not a criminal." But the officer remained unfazed. He opened the file, his tone calm. "According to reports, Mason Ward has deceived multiple women in Baton Rouge and surrounding areas, making false promises of affection to extort money before disappearing. One victim provided evidence of bank transfers and messages, all bearing his name." I stood there silent, my eyes fixed on Mason. He tried to defend himself, his voice faltering. "No, that's not true. It's all a misunderstanding. I didn't deceive anyone." But his eyes wavered, and I knew deep down he understood there was no escape. Daisy, sitting on the other bed, froze. She looked at Mason, then down at the floor as if just realizing a painful truth. You were going to do that to me too?" she whispered, her voice choked as if unwilling to believe she was just another of Mason's victims. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "No, Mason, you couldn't. Why would you do this?" She covered her face with her hands, tears streaming through her fingers. My father stood still, but I saw his shoulders tremble as if anger and disappointment were tearing him apart from within. "What have you done, Mason?" he roared, his voice breaking with pain. "You didn't just betray your brother. You dragged this whole family into the mud." I watched as the police handcuffed Mason, the metal glinting under the hospital lights. He pleaded, his voice hoarse. "Dad, Mom, I'm sorry." "Colton, please. Say something. Say you'll help me." But I just stood there, my gaze icy, not uttering a word. I no longer saw Mason as my brother. I saw only a man who had exploited my trust, Daisy's trust, and the trust of countless others. The bond I had once cherished was now a distant memory. Daisy broke down crying, but this time I felt no pity. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Colton, I didn't know. I didn't know he was deceiving me. I thought..." But I cut her off with a sharp, cold stare. I didn't need to hear more. Her lies, her excuses about the busy shop or meeting friends, were now just fragments of a marriage that was already dead. The police led Mason out of the room, his hands cuffed behind his back. My mother lunged forward, grabbing an officer's arm, begging, "Please, officers, let my son go. He just made a mistake." But the officer gently pried her hand away, his voice calm. "Ma'am, we're just following orders. He'll have a chance to explain himself in court." My mother collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably while my father stood motionless, as if all his strength had left him. I looked at them, my parents, who had doted on Mason to the point of blindness, now paying the price for their favoritism. I walked out, and this time I knew there was nothing left to make me turn back. The sound of my mother's cries, the clink of handcuffs, and the officer's footsteps faded into the distance. I didn't look back. The night wind blew, carrying a biting chill. All the lies, favoritism, and sins of the Ward family had come to an end. Mason, the brother once so cherished, was now in handcuffs like a criminal. Daisy, the wife I had loved, was just another victim in Mason's game. And my parents, who had placed Mason above me for years, now faced the harsh truth about the son they adored. News about Mason spread through Baton Rouge like wildfire. Just hours after the police led him away from the hospital, local newspapers published articles with sensational headlines. Baton Rouge man arrested for scamming multiple women. Social media exploded with posts, comments, and rumors about Mason, the charming man with a deadly smile who had exploited the trust of countless people. The Ward family, once seen as a model of stability and decency, became the center of a humiliating scandal. Neighbors who once greeted me with smiles every morning now looked at me with curious stares, whispering behind my back as I passed by. My father, Tom, could barely bring himself to leave the house. The man who had once taken pride in the family's reputation now sat in the living room, his eyes vacant, staring out the window. In the days following the incident, my mother told me he hardly spoke, only occasionally muttering, "Why did he do this to us?" My mother, Helen, spiraled into a crisis. She started seeing a therapist, torn apart by guilt for blindly defending Mason all those years. "I was wrong, Colton," she said to me over the phone, her voice choked with tears. "I was wrong to think Mason just needed time to grow up." But her apology, though sincere, came too late. I didn't stay in Baton Rouge to witness my family's collapse. A few days after that night at the hospital, I filed for divorce. I stood in the living room looking around the small house where Daisy and I had lived for 3 years. The wedding photo on the wall, the potted plants Daisy once tended, the couch where we used to cuddle and watch movies. All of it was now just fragments of a dream that had vanished. I packed my belongings, taking only the essentials, a few clothes, some documents, and a notebook where I'd once written down our plans for the future. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen table without a note. Daisy faced public humiliation. Her nail salon, once bustling with customers, was now deserted. Social media was merciless, mocking posts, cruel comments, and rumors about her being one of Mason's victims. The salon could no longer stay afloat, and eventually she was forced to close it. Daisy tried to reach out to me, sending texts, calling, even showing up at the house once, tears streaming down her face. "Colton, please talk to me." I was wrong, but I didn't know he was like that. I looked at her through the glass door but didn't open it. I said nothing, not out of anger, but because I had nothing left to say. She had chosen Mason, chosen his lies, and now she had to live with the consequences. Mason was held in custody pending trial. The charges against him piled up: organized fraud, misappropriation of property, and other offenses from victims who had come forward. One woman provided evidence of thousands of dollars in bank transfers, along with sweet-talking messages Mason had sent to manipulate her. Prosecutors said he could face a lengthy prison sentence. I didn't visit Mason, didn't call, didn't write. He was once my brother, but now he was just a name from the past. Before leaving Baton Rouge, I visited my parents one last time. The old house in the suburbs was unchanged, with its wooden porch and weed-filled garden. But the atmosphere inside was heavy, as if all joy had been drained. My father sat at the dining table, his hair grayer, his eyes weary. "Colton," he said, his voice low and hoarse, "I'm sorry. I wasn't fair to you. I put Mason above everything, and now I see how wrong I was." My mother sat beside him, her eyes red, clutching my hand. "I didn't know, Colton. I thought Mason was just a boy who needed protection. I was wrong." I looked at them, my parents, the people who had shaped my childhood with their favoritism and harsh expectations. I wasn't angry at them, not really. I was just tired. "I don't blame you," I said, my voice even. "But I need to start over. Somewhere without these memories." My mother burst into tears, hugging me, but I only patted her shoulder lightly before standing up. I didn't want to linger in that moment. I left Baton Rouge early one morning as the first light of dawn broke. I drove toward Texas, where I'd found a new job at a building supply store. My luggage was light, but the pain I carried was heavy. I didn't look back, didn't check my phone, didn't read the articles still circulating about Mason. I just drove, leaving behind the familiar streets, the painful memories, and the Ward family. As I passed the Leaving Baton Rouge sign, I felt a true sense of freedom, though it came with a scar that would never heal. I knew I'd never forget Daisy, Mason, or the years I'd spent sacrificing. But I also knew that from now on I would live for myself, not for anyone else, not for expectations or lies, only for Colton Ward, the man who had stepped out of the darkness carrying his pain but also a hope for a new life. I arrived in Texas on a mild, sunny day, settling in a small town nestled among vast fields and dusty roads. The town was peaceful, with friendly people who weren't nosy and knew nothing of my past. I found a job at a building supply store, still in the familiar role of a manager, where I could organize shelves, advise customers, and find stability in simple things. My life now was free of dramatic turmoil, free of lies and evasive glances. I lived simply in a small apartment with an old wooden table and a window overlooking the fields. But some nights when the moonlight streamed through the window, I still remembered everything. The image of Daisy walking into the rental house, Mason's hand on her back, and the pained looks on my parents' faces as the truth unraveled. They flashed vividly, like an old film that never stopped playing. I remembered my childhood years when my father taught me that being the eldest meant sacrificing, when my mother doted on Mason and forgot that I too needed love. I remembered the bottle of lubricant, the tube of industrial glue, and the moment I decided to take back my life. But now those memories no longer fueled anger. They were just scars reminding me of what I had overcome. I came to understand that some pains aren't meant for revenge, but for awakening. The betrayal by Daisy and Mason, the favoritism of my parents, it all forced me to look at myself, to ask, who am I and how do I want to live? The greatest lesson I learned from it all was this: trust is the most precious thing in a family. Once betrayed, everything can be rebuilt, except trust. I had once trusted Daisy with all my heart, trusted Mason as a brother, trusted my parents to be fair. But when that trust shattered, I realized no one could give it back to me except myself. I told myself, and perhaps others, that silence is not weakness. In the most painful days when I uncovered the truth, when I stood watching Daisy and Mason being loaded into the ambulance, I chose silence. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew the truth would reveal itself. Silence was the most profound form of retribution, forcing those who betrayed me to face their own sins with nowhere to hide. Over time, my parents began reaching out again. The initial calls were awkward, just polite check-ins, but gradually they opened up. One time, my mother called, her voice trembling. "Colton, I'm sorry. I was wrong to put Mason above you. I just wanted to protect him, but I hurt you." My father, in a rare handwritten letter, admitted he had been too harsh with me, too lenient with Mason. "You deserved better, Colton," he wrote. "I wish I could do it over." I didn't hold a grudge against them, not really. I just nodded over the phone or through their words and said I had forgiven them. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. Daisy disappeared from Baton Rouge. I heard she moved somewhere far away, perhaps to escape the prying eyes and gossip. Her nail salon, once thriving, was now an empty storefront with a "for lease" sign on the glass. Mason, meanwhile, was sentenced to prison. The charges against him were overwhelming, backed by evidence from a string of victims. I didn't follow the trial, didn't read the news, didn't care to know how long he'd be locked away. I lived in Texas day by day with simple routines. I went to work, drank coffee each morning, and sometimes sat by the window watching the sunset over the fields. Some days I thought about what I'd lost: love, family, trust. But then I'd look at the fiery red sky, and I knew I'd found something more valuable: freedom. Freedom to live true to myself, unbound by expectations or lies. My story closed on an afternoon as I stood by the field watching the sun set. The golden glow bathed the new land like a promise of rebirth. I whispered to myself, my voice low and steady. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I no longer let pain control me. I stood there, breathing in the fresh air, and felt a new Colton. Not the sacrificing older brother, not the betrayed husband, but a man who had rediscovered himself, ready to walk forward on his own path, 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 on his own path.